Hello, family. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also, share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Curtis remained rooted on the tarmac long after the roar of the departing jet faded into the clouds. The wind picked up slightly, ruffling the pages of the DNA report he still clutched. Each line on the document was a silent rebuke, exposing the lie he had comfortably lived in, that Laura would never be able to give him children, that he had moved on for something better. But now 3 children existed, his children, with her, and they looked so much like him it hurt. His fingers trembled as he folded the paper carefully, placing it in his coat pocket like it held his last thread of truth. For the first time in years, his pride collapsed into something unfamiliar humility. "I didn't even know you tried," he whispered to no one, the echo swallowed by the vastness of the empty tarmac. As the hangar crew returned to business, Curtis remained frozen in place. His phone buzzed in his pocket, Carol, again. He didn't look at it. Instead, he recalled Laura's calm voice. "I didn't need you." Those words gnawed at him, not out of spite, but because they were true. She hadn't screamed or accused. She had simply moved on, built a life he never imagined she was capable of without him. And now he was the one left behind, realizing too late that the quiet woman he'd once taken for granted had not only found her strength, but had made it multiply by 3. "I need to fix this," he muttered under his breath, "even if I lose everything in the process." The apartment felt colder than Curtis remembered, not in temperature but in soul. The walls, once cluttered with Carol's loud taste, gold-trimmed mirrors, velvet pillows, perfume bottles, were stripped bare. Her vanity was cleared, closet space empty, the lingering scent of her body spray fading into the walls. He stood in the center of the living room, unable to move, unable to sit. On the coffee table lay a single picture frame, a photo of himself at a past award dinner, Laura beside him in emerald green, smiling softly. It had fallen face down during Carol's frantic exit, glass cracked. But he didn't pick it up. He sank into the armchair instead, elbows on knees, staring at the wall as if it held the answers. No noise, no movement, no Carol, no children. Just him, and the question of whether redemption ever comes too late. He pulled out the folded report from his pocket again, laid it beside him, and reached for his phone. There were 10 missed calls from Carol, 2 from his lawyer, and a message from a number he didn't recognize. "Your sons made beautiful art today." No name, no follow-up, just that. The weight of it crushed him. His sons, he said the word out loud. My sons. And the room, so proud and perfect just a month ago, suddenly felt like a monument to his blindness. He poured himself a glass of scotch, but didn't drink it. Instead, he walked to the wall behind his desk, dug into a drawer, and brought out a corkboard. Slowly, he began pinning up the photos he had saved from the article. Laura boarding the jet, the boys walking beside her, one photo at a time, one memory he never made. "You didn't just lose her," he whispered to himself. "You lost the chance to be the man they'd be proud of." And for the first time in years, he didn't just feel regret, he felt hunger. The hunger to become more than the man who let it all slip away. Curtis stood outside Rodney Blake's firm, his reflection faintly visible in the building's glass. He didn't know what he expected, perhaps a fist to the face or a slammed door, but he had to try. As he stepped into the waiting room, the receptionist blinked in surprise, but made no move to stop him. Rodney appeared moments later, sharp as always in a charcoal gray suit, eyes unreadable. "I don't have time for court games," he said. "Neither do I," Curtis replied. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to understand." That word, understand, hung heavy in the air, and Rodney finally motioned toward a private office. Once inside, he remained standing. "You had understanding," he said quietly. "You chose ego instead." Curtis looked away. "I was wrong." "You were cruel," Rodney corrected, his voice calm but pointed. "But now you're here. Say what you came to say." Curtis exhaled slowly. "I want to be part of their lives. Not just biologically. I want to know them. Support them. Be around." Rodney's expression didn't change. "That's not something you get to want like it's a promotion. They're not waiting for you to arrive." Curtis stepped closer. "I'm not asking for approval. I'm asking for a path forward, advice, Clarity. Laura won't talk to me. Rodney's stare grew colder. And that's the consequence of your choices. The room pulsed with the silence between two men who knew too much about control and the cost of losing it. Finally, Rodney moved behind his desk. If you want clarity, here it is. This isn't about rights. It's about readiness. Yours, theirs, hers. Curtis nodded slowly, eyes lowering. Then I'll do the work. Rodney didn't respond. He reached into a drawer and slid across a single sheet of paper. Start with this. It's a list of trauma-informed family therapists. If you can sit with your guilt without running from it, maybe there's a place for you at their table. Curtis took the paper without a word. For the first time, he realized this wasn't about proving himself to Laura, but becoming someone his sons wouldn't fear. That night, Curtis returned home and cleared his office of every award, plaque, and self-congratulatory item that had once lined the shelves. The room that had shouted his accomplishments now felt like an echo chamber of ego. In its place, he printed out full-resolution screenshots from the article, every image he could find of Laura and the triplets. One showed Laura laughing as Julian tugged on her jacket. Another caught Caleb mid-run with a jet in the background. And the last, the one that tore something open in him, showed Miles gripping her pinky finger as they stepped out of the aircraft. He pinned them carefully along the corkboard, lining each row with precision. Each photo was no longer just a reminder of loss. They were fuel, a reason to try harder. The final touch was a blank piece of paper he pinned in the center. Across the top, he wrote, "What they deserve" in heavy ink. Beneath it, he listed no promises. No plans, just names Julian, Caleb, Miles. Curtis stared at their names until the letters blurred. Then he picked up a pen and began writing something he hadn't attempted in years, a letter addressed not to Laura, but to the boys. "I know I missed the beginning," he scribbled. "But if there's ever a middle or an end, I want to be there." One letter turned into two, two into three. They weren't masterpieces, but they were honest. He placed them inside a wooden box and labeled it Someday. As he turned off the lights and stood in the doorway, something shifted in him. No longer a man chasing reputation, Curtis Bennett had finally begun chasing responsibility. Carol stood in the doorway, her eyes ringed with smudged mascara and desperation. "I still have keys," she whispered, stepping into Curtis's condo without invitation. He didn't lift his head from the stack of documents on his desk. "Then use them to leave," he replied coolly. She laughed, a nervous, broken sound. "So that's it? You just walk away from everything we had?" Curtis stood, calm but unmoved. "There was never a we, Carol. There was distraction, noise. The body I clung to when I didn't want to hear myself think." She took a step forward, voice trembling. "I was there when she wasn't. I held you together." His stare was heavy. "No. You helped me pretend I wasn't falling apart." She reached for his arm, but he stepped back. "Curtis, I loved you," she murmured. "You loved what being with me gave you. Power, applause, the illusion of winning." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "Is it because she has your kids now?" He didn't answer. Silence crushed the room. Then finally he said, "She had herself. That's what I lost." Carol's shoulders slumped. "If I leave now, I won't come back again." Curtis nodded. "Then let this be your last performance." Her breath hitched, but she turned, slowly walking out. As the door clicked shut behind her, Curtis didn't sigh or lean against the wall. He simply returned to his chair, picked up a framed sketch Caleb had drawn from the article, and whispered, "I'm not missing my second chance." The art gallery was almost empty, except for the sound of soft jazz humming from overhead speakers. Laura arrived 5 minutes late, clad in a gray linen jumpsuit and simple flats, her curls pinned back. She spotted Curtis by a watercolor exhibit, his hands clasped behind his back, unusually still. "This better not be a show," she said firmly, stepping beside him. He didn't turn. "It's not. It's just a quiet place to speak." She folded her arms. "Then speak." He looked at her for a long moment. "I don't want a stage. I just want to know my boys. I don't care what it costs me, money, reputation, control." Her lips parted slightly, caught off guard. "You gave them life, Curtis," she said. "But presence isn't something you demand." He nodded slowly. "I'm not asking for a title. I'm asking for an opening." Laura's voice was steady. "They already have a life, one I bled for. One I built while you were busy building a fantasy." He swallowed hard, words failing him. "I know," he finally muttered. "Then why now?" she asked. "Because I looked into 3 little faces that carried my features, but none of my memories," he replied. "And I hated the man who allowed that." Her expression shifted, ever so slightly. Not warmth, but understanding. "This isn't about you anymore," she said. "I know," he said again. "But maybe it's about what they deserve from both of us." She said nothing as she turned to leave, her silence more haunting than any refusal. But she didn't tell him to stop trying. Margaret poured tea into 2 mismatched mugs at Laura's kitchen island, her eyes occasionally drifting to the laughter coming from the boys' room. "He asked for a chance?" she asked, setting 1 cup down. Laura nodded, her fingers wrapped around the warm ceramic. "He looked smaller than I remember." Margaret tilted her head. Grief shrinks even the proud. Laura sipped quietly. It didn't feel like manipulation, just brokenness. Margaret tapped her nails lightly on the mug. "People don't change in silence. They change in struggle, and he hasn't struggled long enough for that change to stick." Laura met her gaze. "So what? I wait until he bleeds." Margaret shook her head. "No. You watch if he's willing to walk barefoot over the glass he broke." Laura exhaled slowly, emotion tightening her chest. "Part of me wants to believe him. The other part still feels the cold of that hospital room, when I held our babies alone." Margaret reached across the counter and held her hand. "That memory isn't here to haunt you. It's here to protect you." Laura blinked, her eyes glistening. "And what about the boys?" "They don't need a fantasy reunion," Margaret said. "They need safety, routine, and truth. If Curtis becomes a truth they can rely on, that's a bridge you can build together. But don't rush to paint it pretty." Laura gave a tired smile. "You always make it sound so poetic." Margaret grinned. "That's because life's too messy not to be metaphors." They sat quietly, the steam from their tea rising like prayers. In the next room, Miles giggled, shouting, "Mommy, look!" Laura turned, heart swelling. "Coming, baby." And for the first time that day, she didn't feel torn, just grounded. Carol lay motionless on the couch, eyes fixed on the ceiling as the sound of Curtis's keys turning in the door echoed through the apartment. She quickly adjusted her breathing, placing 1 hand on her chest as though struggling. The door opened, and Curtis stepped in, already loosening his tie. "Curtis!" she gasped, voice weak and trembling. They turned sharply. "What now?" he asked, his voice flat. Carol clutched her chest, trembling. "Something's wrong. My heart. I think I'm having a panic attack." Without another word, Curtis rushed to her side, his reflexes overriding his logic. He scooped her up, carried her to the car, and drove straight to the hospital. Along the way, Carol reached for his hand across the console. "I don't want to be alone, not again." Curtis didn't pull away, but his silence was stiffer than steel. At the ER reception, she was wheeled in, and he remained outside, pacing, conflicted, confused, but not fooled. When the doctor finally emerged, he shook his head. "She's fine. Just acute stress, nothing physically alarming." Curtis nodded, exhaling, then stepped inside to see her. Carol sat upright on the bed, tears smudging her mascara. "You came," she whispered. He nodded, then pulled a chair up beside her, but didn't sit. "You should stay with your sister tonight," he said plainly. "I'll arrange for a car." Her expression fell. "Curtis, please, don't push me out." She reached for his hand again, more desperately this time. "You think she'll let you back in? You think Laura will erase the years you neglected her just because she has your sons?" Curtis looked down at her, a slow, thoughtful pause before replying. "This isn't about Laura forgiving me, Carol. It's about me learning who I've been." He turned and walked out without another word, leaving her in stunned silence, alone, again. At the brightly decorated community school, a crowd of parents gathered for the annual art fair. Laughter filled the air, and children darted across the grass with paint-stained fingers and wild grins. From behind a large oak tree near the edge of the playground, Curtis stood watching. His baseball cap was low, his sunglasses in place. He didn't come to be seen. He came to feel. And what he felt now was both warmth and ache. On the far side of the playground, he spotted Julian, carefully coloring inside the lines of a cardboard rocket ship. Caleb sat nearby, dipping his fingers into blue paint, and Miles, the most expressive, ran around with a cape made from canvas. They were a blur of joy, of everything Curtis had imagined a father might experience, but never truly knew. When Miles tripped and his paintbrush flew from his hand, Curtis instinctively stepped forward. He was almost halfway out from behind the tree when he stopped. Another hand, Laura's, reached down and picked up the brush, dusted Miles's knees, and kissed his forehead. Curtis froze in place. She hadn't seen him, but the moment played out like a slow-motion film. His sons didn't know he was there, but his heart throbbed as if they'd looked straight through the tree and into him. A father hiding in the shadows of the life he once rejected. He took out his phone and snapped a picture, not of their faces, but of the moment. Then he turned to leave. As he did, Caleb looked up from his project, paused, and waved toward the trees just once. Curtis stopped in his tracks, then slowly lifted his hand and waved back. Laura turned, just briefly, squinting. But by the time she looked closer, he was already gone. Curtis sat alone in his study, the walls silent but heavy with printed photos of the boys and their mother. He stared at the open journal in front of him, pen in hand, and dated the top of the page, to Julian, Caleb, and Miles Day 1. The first sentence came slowly. I don't know where to begin, because I don't know how to tell you what I missed. He wrote about the way Miles flung his arms like a superhero at the art fair, how Julian stayed precise even in chaos, and how Caleb hummed under his breath while painting. He wrote about how proud he was, not for what they did, but simply for existing. The words flowed, not perfectly but honestly. He didn't edit, didn't censor, just bled onto the page. He called it his box of presents. Letters he'd write daily until the day he could hand them over, or die trying. He sealed the first letter and placed it in a carved wooden box on the shelf. Then another, and another. Each one held more of him than any meeting or gift ever could. Curtis wrote to the boys about his failures, not in the abstract, but in vivid, detailed truth. He chose ego over intimacy. I thought strength was being needed, not being vulnerable. I see it now. Some nights he cried while writing. Some mornings he woke early just to add a note. He began researching their favorite cartoons, mimicking their speech patterns in the letters. To Miles, you're not loud, you're alive. Stay that way. He addressed one envelope to Laura too. Just one. But he didn't seal it. He wasn't ready. And maybe she wasn't either. But in that silent room, filled with letters never sent, Curtis began the most honest dialogue he had ever known, one without an audience, but full of repentance. Carol stood by the glass window of her apartment, watching the sunset fold into the horizon, but her mind was far from peace. Her phone buzzed with an alert, a photo someone had taken of Curtis standing near the school gate a few days ago. The caption read, "Spotted Curtis Bennett near Ridgewood Primary." Her blood ran cold. "What are you doing, Curtis?" she murmured, clicking the image open. The man she thought she had tethered was quietly orbiting someone else's world, and worse, doing it gently. She tried calling him 3 times. No response. She texted him a single sentence. "We need to talk now." Minutes later, still no reply. Her breathing grew shallow. "She won't win," Carol muttered, pacing. "She might have birthed his sons, but I carried him through his rebirth." In that moment, jealousy wasn't just burning. It was devouring. The next morning, Carol waited outside Laura's office with sunglasses, a large coat, and a fake smile. When Laura stepped out with a fabric sample book tucked under her arm, Carol stepped in front of her. "You think he's back because of them?" she asked with a smirk. Laura barely flinched. "Excuse me," Laura said, attempting to step around her. Carol blocked her path again, her voice lowering. "He always returns to me. You're a detour." A motherhood-themed nostalgia. Laura's eyes locked onto hers, quiet and unbothered. "He can return to whoever he wants," she said. "But the truth has a way of living loud even when you whisper lies." Carol flinched slightly, but recovered, digging into her purse. She pulled out a glossy photo of Curtis and her at a past gala, then another of a doctor's note. "We're building something too. And this time, you're the footnote." Laura looked down at the paper, then met Carol's eyes again. "I'm not in a contest," she said calmly. "But you might want to check if he's still playing." With that, Laura walked away, and Carol stood alone, clutching props that suddenly felt paper-thin. Curtis sat across from his lawyer in a minimalist office downtown, the late afternoon light drawing lines across the marble floors. The lawyer, Mr. Harrell, had been with him since the early real estate days. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" Harrell asked, holding up the prepared documents. Curtis nodded, eyes unwavering. "Draw up the final papers. I want my name off everything except the consulting board." Harrell leaned back, confused. "You're forfeiting over 60% of your equity. That's not something men in your position do without a plan." Curtis simply said, "It's not about a plan. It's about weight, and I'm done carrying the wrong things." The lawyer nodded slowly, then reached for his pen. "All right, but this changes your entire legacy." Curtis replied, "Exactly, that's the point." Later that evening, Curtis walked through the now half-vacant lobby of his main office. He paused before the giant photo of himself from a magazine feature, Curtis Bennett, Empire Builder. He stared at the smile in the frame that didn't match the man he had become. Without warning, he reached up, removed the framed photo from the wall, and set it gently on a side table. Back in his penthouse, he pulled open the drawer with the boys' letters and added a new one. "Today I gave up what used to be everything so I can become the man you'll never have to question." As he sealed it, his assistant called. "Mr. Bennett, Carol is demanding to know if the rumors about your exit are true." Curtis closed the drawer. "Let her demand," he said. "Tell her I'm unavailable for anything that isn't healing." For the first time in years, his voice carried no arrogance, just a peace rooted in clarity. He wasn't shedding assets. He was shedding armor. The sun hung low over the park, casting soft shadows across the slides and swings. Laura sat on a wooden bench under the jacaranda tree, her sketchbook on her lap as the boys ran through grass, laughter trailing behind them. Julian was attempting to fly a kite. Miles was pretending to be a pilot, shouting, "Prepare for takeoff," while Caleb quietly collected sticks and lined them up like a runway. It was the kind of peaceful Saturday Laura rarely had anymore. No clients, no emails. Just air and their joy. Then, from the corner of her eye, she noticed a man near the fence. He wasn't moving, just standing still, a little too carefully. Sunglasses, cap, she narrowed her eyes. Her heart stilled. It was him. Curtis stood just beyond the playground fence, watching from behind a park bench. He wasn't trying to approach, just observe. His eyes followed the boys' movements as if memorizing them. When Caleb tripped and sat up laughing, Curtis's face broke into a smile he hadn't worn in years, soft, unguarded, aching. Miles spotted him but didn't recognize him fully. Still, the boy tilted his head curiously. Without thinking, he waved. Curtis lifted his hand, returning the wave subtly. Laura closed her sketchbook slowly, her fingers tightening. She didn't walk over. She didn't call him. Instead, she studied his stillness. Not eager, not imposing, just there. As she stood to gather the boys, her mind swirled, not with anger or forgiveness, but with the confusing hum of memory, motherhood, and the mystery of what truly made a man start over. As they walked away, she looked back once more. Curtis hadn't moved. He stood quietly, like someone hoping that being near what he lost might teach him how not to lose again. The condo smelled like nostalgia, her choice of wine, his favorite jazz playlist humming low from the smart speaker, flickering of candles strategically placed around the dining area. Carol stood in the center of it all, dressed in a black silk gown that shimmered in the dim lighting, the neckline just revealing enough to stir old memories. She'd spent the last 3 hours perfecting this, truffle risotto simmering, her hair pinned back in soft waves, and the perfume he once told her made him forget time. The table was set for 2, but the seat across from her remained empty. Every tick of the clock above the fireplace pulled the silk tighter against her chest. She checked her phone. Nothing. Again! She sighed, uncorking the wine with trembling fingers. "He'll come," she whispered to herself, voice breaking just enough to betray the hope clinging to her. By 9:45 p.m., the candles had started to lean. The wine sat untouched in his glass. Carol finally slid out of the stilettos that had begun to pinch her toes. She stared out at the city skyline, her arms folded against herself. A gust of wind tapped gently at the window, and she pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Her reflection looked exhausted, not alluring. Alone, not desired. Then the lock clicked, and her eyes flew to the door. But it wasn't Curtis. It was the building cleaner, startled to find her still there. "Sorry, miss," he said awkwardly. She nodded stiffly, blinking back tears. She sat on the edge of the leather couch and dialed him again. Voicemail. She left a message, her voice quivering but coded in defiance. You think she's the only one who loved you. I was there before the fall, before the triplets. I kept you breathing. You owe me that dinner, Curtis. You owe me something. She ended the call, but not the ache. That lingered. Curtis was reviewing a file at his new shared office space, just 2 blocks from the park the boys frequented, when his assistant brought in an envelope. This just arrived, Sir Hand delivered. He opened it calmly, half expecting another notice from a former client or a bank. But inside was a single sonogram image. And a note, our baby is real. I hope you're ready. His brows twitched slightly. That was all. No name, no warmth, just strategy. Moments later, Carol's name flashed across his phone. He answered quietly, yes. Her voice came on strong and hopeful. I thought it was time we talked. Curtis sighed and leaned back in his chair. Then talk. Carol wasted no time. I'm pregnant, Curtis. This changes things. I know you've been distant, but this brings us back together. It has to. There was silence for a beat too long. Then Curtis replied, his voice neutral. Congratulations. The word landed like a stone. Carol hesitated. That's it? She asked, disbelief threading through her tone. No excitement? No questions? Curtis remained still. If you're happy, then I'm glad for you. She was stunned. You don't even want to know how far along I am? He exhaled. Carol, if this is about forcing my hand, I've already let go of everything that used to control me. There was a pause. So what now? She asked, the desperation becoming audible. We raise a child apart? Curtis stood and walked to the window, watching a mother hold her child's hand at the intersection below. You do whatever you need to do, he said calmly. But I'm not stepping backward to fit into a future I've already outgrown. He ended the call. The sonogram image sat on his desk, unframed, untouched. And for the first time, he didn't feel torn. He felt certain. Margaret burst into Laura's studio late that afternoon, out of breath, holding her phone up like it carried news from the front lines of a war. You're not going to like this, she said, handing it over. Laura read the blog headline. Curtis Bennett to be a father again. Her eyes froze at the embedded sonogram image. Please tell me this is one of those fake gossip leaks, she said, her tone calm but glassy. Margaret shook her head. It came straight from Carol's publicist. Laura placed the phone down gently and sat at the edge of her work table. So she's pulling the pregnancy card now. Margaret nodded. How do you want to handle it? Laura's fingers folded tightly in her lap. We don't. I'll not offer commentary on another woman's womb. But if he brings this mess anywhere near my children, he'll regret it. That night, Laura watched the triplets sleep, the soft whir of their white noise machine blending into the ticking clock. Julian mumbled something in his dream and turned over. Caleb's small hand was draped over Miles's chest like a protective barrier. She pulled the blankets up gently and then stepped out into the hallway, her back against the door. Her breathing was slow but heavy. She picked up her phone and texted Rodney. Any legal recourse if a supposed sibling arrives? He responded immediately. Depends on paternity, but let's not jump yet. She stared at the text for a long moment before replying. I won't be blindsided again. Across the city, Curtis stared at his own phone, unsure if that cold silence from Laura would ever thaw. But he didn't blame her. Not anymore. Curtis stared at the ceiling above his minimalist bed, the silence in his condo growing louder by the hour. He hadn't slept in 2 nights, not deeply. The latest headlines about Carol's supposed pregnancy lingered in his mind like smoke, but that wasn't what unsettled him most. It was the silence from Laura and the boys. Rodney called that morning, but not with updates about custody or paperwork. He asked something different. Have you considered therapy? Curtis scoffed at first. Rod, this isn't childhood trauma. We're dealing with real-time consequences. But Rodney didn't flinch. Exactly. And unless you're okay living in circles, you need to break the loop. Later that evening, Curtis stood outside the therapy office for 23 minutes before finally walking in. The woman who greeted him had soft eyes and a firm handshake. Curtis Bennett, she said. First time? He nodded. Long overdue. The session wasn't dramatic. It was awkward, quiet. He started by insisting he wasn't there for pity, and that he was done chasing anyone. The therapist, Dr. Halima Adagok, said gently, "Then let's talk about what you've been running from instead." Her tone wasn't invasive, it was clinical, almost surgical in its clarity. Curtis admitted he never really unpacked his shame. That the day Laura left with the triplets, it wasn't just heartbreak, it was exposure. "She saw through me," he said, staring at the carpet. "And I hated that someone knew the man behind the suit." Halima leaned forward slightly. "And who is that man?" He was silent. The quiet was thick with truths he hadn't yet formed into words. He left the session an hour later with no grand revelations, just a printout of his next appointment and a question that wouldn't leave his mind. "Can you be a good father if you never learned how to be a whole man?" Carol lay back on the examination chair at a private clinic she'd paid heavily to keep quiet. She glanced nervously at the door as the technician applied cool gel to her stomach. She turned her head to the side when asked to look at the screen. "Anything?" she asked. The technician didn't respond immediately. "Ma'am, I see no fetal movement." "Are you sure?" Carol cut her off, smiling faintly. "This is a precaution. I'm early." "Very early." The technician hesitated. "It's not showing on the monitor." Carol slid her shirt back down. "Then maybe next week," she said coolly, grabbing the glossy ultrasound print she'd demanded anyway. That evening, she sat at her vanity, adding the print to a folder filled with prescriptions she never filled and vitamins she never swallowed. It wasn't a baby, it was a strategy. A leash. Curtis arrived later that night at her request, but his demeanor was unreadable. Carol lit candles again, though she didn't expect romance this time. She handed him the ultrasound with soft, practiced hands. "They printed it for me," she said, watching his face closely. Curtis studied the image for a long moment, then looked up. "You know the thing about time?" he asked, handing the photo back. "It always reveals what pressure hides." She blinked, confused. "Are you saying you don't believe me?" He shrugged slightly. "I'm saying I've learned to wait. Truth is patient. It always shows up, like stretch marks or silence." Carol's confidence wavered just slightly. "You think I would lie about carrying your child?" she asked, almost whispering now. Curtis tucked the photo into his pocket, kissed her forehead with a kind of goodbye, and said softly, "Time will tell, Carol. But you won't be the one it surprises." The school's project day buzzed with the low hum of excited children and proud parents. Paint splatters, cardboard cities, and papier-mâché animals filled the multi-purpose room. Laura stood by a long table, helping Julian rearrange his volcano model. Meanwhile, Caleb handed her a folded sheet of paper with quiet pride. "It's for you, Mummy." She smiled, unfolding the drawing carefully. It was a crayon sketch of their family, Laura, the 3 boys, and on the far end, a tall figure shaded in gray. The figure stood just outside the group, smiling. Caleb had drawn him with a cap and sunglasses. Laura's heart stuttered. "Who is this?" she asked softly. Caleb replied without hesitation, "That man who watched us at the park." He smiled at me. She swallowed hard. The boys hadn't mentioned it since. She thought they hadn't noticed. Laura excused herself, stepping into the hallway to breathe. Her fingers trembled as she held the drawing. Margaret soon found her, concern etched on her face. "Hey, you okay?" Laura nodded. "Just kids?" And their honesty. She handed Margaret the drawing. Margaret studied it and gave a low whistle. "That's him, isn't it?" Laura nodded slowly. He didn't approach them. He just watched. Margaret raised a brow. "Maybe he's finally learning boundaries." Laura sighed, tucking the drawing into her purse. "Or maybe the boys see a version of him that I no longer do." That night, Laura pinned the drawing beside her bedroom mirror, not for sentiment, but as a reminder. Children remember. They see more than we allow. And even in silence, they interpret presence. Whether that would be a comfort or a complication, only time would tell. Curtis sat in the discreet waiting room of a private clinic far removed from the city's noise. The weight in his chest hadn't lifted in weeks, despite the therapy and long walks that promised clarity. His mind replayed Carol's every word, every gesture, and every carefully timed sigh. But today wasn't about her, it was about certainty. A few weeks after seeing the triplets, he made a decision he told no one about, not even Rodney. The doctor stepped in with a calm, assured presence. "Your results are ready," she said, handing him a sealed envelope. but Curtis didn't open it. "Tell me straight," he said, voice steady. "Vasectomy was successful." She nodded. "Procedure was done 5 months ago." "You're sterile, Mr. Bennett." His breath didn't shake. He closed his eyes for a moment. He hadn't done it out of revenge or strategy. He'd done it because he couldn't risk dragging another child into the mess he'd made, especially not one tied to manipulation. Back at home, he sat in his dimly lit study, staring at the sealed envelope. On his desk lay a small stack of papers, letters he'd written to each of the boys, to Laura, and to a version of himself he'd finally outgrown. He had rehearsed this truth, not as a weapon, but as a safeguard. He couldn't stop Carol from scheming, but he could stop himself from becoming the kind of man who fathered children out of guilt or pressure. He thought of the triplets, their laughter in that video Rodney had sent, the way one of them, Caleb, had waved toward the park bench like he somehow knew. Curtis whispered aloud, "They're the only legacy I'll ever want." His voice cracked mid-sentence. Then he folded the letter with the report and tucked it into a marked envelope. He'd give it to Laura, not to win her over, but to give her peace. The truth wasn't something he owed her. It was something she deserved. Laura didn't knock. She walked straight into the reception area of Curtis's condo building, her heels firm against the marble floor. She had reached her limit. The whispers, the questions, the speculation about Carol's pregnancy, it all blurred into a wall she refused to let rise again. The doorman, startled by her confidence, let her through without hesitation. Curtis opened the door, surprised but not alarmed. She didn't waste time. "I'm only here for clarity," she said, stepping in. "I don't want flowers. I don't need closure. I need answers." He gestured toward the couch, but she stood instead. "Is she pregnant?" Curtis tilted his head slowly. "Why ask me that now?" Laura folded her arms. "Because I won't allow my sons to be pulled into a carousel of lies and women who fake families." Curtis moved to the drawer of his console table and pulled out the envelope he had prepared. He didn't speak right away. Instead, he extended it with both hands. "This will explain more than I ever could." Laura hesitated, eyeing it like it might explode. "What is this?" she asked. "The truth," he said simply. Unfiltered. No manipulation. Just proof. She opened it slowly, scanning the contents. Confirmation of his vasectomy, the date of the procedure, and a signed physician's note. At the bottom was a test result, no pregnancy in Carol's name. Laura's fingers trembled slightly. You did this before she even announced it?" Curtis nodded. "The night I saw the boys. I knew then I had no right to bring more chaos into this world, especially through someone like her." Laura looked at him, confused and cautious. "So you've been playing along?" He let out a tired sigh. "No, I've been waiting for her story to unravel, and for you to know that I would never jeopardize the peace you built." Back at her apartment, Laura sat on the edge of her bed long after the boys had gone to sleep. The envelope rested in her lap, already read 3 times over, but still heavier than her hands could bear. The truth unraveled in pieces. Curtis hadn't just stepped away from Carol. He had taken a permanent step toward responsibility. She kept going back to the date on the medical report. It aligned precisely with the week after their airport encounter, when he'd seen the boys. She remembered his silence that day, not smug, not cold, just deeply still. Like someone facing a truth too large for words. Margaret knocked gently and walked in, sensing her friend's unrest. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice soft. Laura nodded. He cut off his ability to father. Voluntarily, silently. Margaret sat beside her. "That's not love," she said. "That's transformation." Laura didn't respond right away. She kept staring at the words printed in black and white. Carol had told anyone who would listen that she was pregnant. Curtis had said nothing to challenge her. He had let the lie breathe, let it build until it choked itself. Laura picked up the folded report and placed it into a small box where she kept her son's birth wristbands, first curls, and ultrasound photos. A sacred place. But she also placed a post-it beside it. "Do not forget what he did and what it cost him." Margaret watched, concerned. "Are you forgiving him?" Laura shook her head. "Not yet. But I'm starting to see the difference between who he was and who he's trying to become." She exhaled slowly, feeling a weight she hadn't even noticed begin to lift. Healing wouldn't come wrapped in apologies or perfectly timed gestures. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was holding everything alone. The hospital lobby was quiet, too quiet for Carol's expectations. She had orchestrated the timing perfectly, wearing a maternity dress with a pillow-soft bump tucked beneath. Her plan was to bump into mutual friends near the lobby and accidentally reveal the pregnancy while checking in. But as she approached the front desk, a familiar voice halted her in her tracks. "Carol Myers," Rodney called calmly, stepping from behind a pillar. In his hand, a single document folder with her name in bold. Her face shifted instantly. "Rodney, what are you doing here?" she asked, voice brittle. "Returning something," he replied, walking toward her. Or rather, exposing it. He opened the folder and began to read aloud. "No viable pregnancy. Negative HCG. Vasectomy performed on Curtis Bennett 5 months ago." The silence became suffocating. The receptionist blinked. 2 bystanders paused mid-step. Carol tried to laugh. "You're mistaken. That's not mine." Rodney's tone never wavered. "The lab pulled the sample you submitted. False content. You've been lying." Her hand went to her belly out of instinct, but it was useless now. The receptionist, now alert, discreetly excused herself from the awkwardness, leaving Carol alone in the center of her unraveling. "Why are you doing this here?" she hissed. Rodney's eyes narrowed. "Because you dragged this charade into public, into Laura's peace, into 3 innocent lives. You don't deserve the luxury of privacy." Carol took a slow step back, the edge of panic breaking into her voice. "He'll forgive me. He always comes back." Rodney tilted his head. "He's not coming back. He's moving forward. This game, it's over." The crowd was minimal, but the shame stung worse than a stadium. And just like that, the image she had built collapsed, without so much as a scream. Curtis and Laura sat at a corner cafe neither of them had ever visited before, chosen purposefully to avoid familiarity. The sun filtered gently through the wide windows, glinting off the untouched glasses of water between them. Neither spoke for the first 5 minutes. Curtis toyed with a paper napkin, while Laura's gaze stayed fixed outside, watching people who had no idea of the past layered between them. "Thank you for the report," she finally said. "You didn't owe me that." Curtis looked up, weary but sincere. "I didn't do it to earn anything back. I just didn't want to let the lie breathe any longer." She nodded slowly. "Carol's been exposed." Rodney made sure of it. "There's nothing left to wonder about." Curtis sighed, his hand rubbing the back of his neck. "You were right not to trust me. I didn't even trust myself before." Laura turned to face him fully now. "You talk differently," she noted. "It's not just the words. It's the weight behind them." He smiled faintly. "I had to fall hard enough to finally hear the silence I caused." They let the quiet stretch again. No pressure, no forced conclusions. Just space. Laura took a breath. "We're not the same people who sat in a courtroom signing divorce papers." "No," he agreed. "Back then we were reacting. Now we're recovering." A breeze floated in through the window. Laura stood. "I'm not promising anything, Curtis. But I'm not shutting the door either. Just don't expect to walk through it until you've earned the key." He nodded solemnly. "I'm not asking to rush, just to wait where I can still see the door." They parted without an embrace, but with something far more powerful: permission to be human again. The community center wasn't glamorous, but its walls held stories, stories of brokenness and repair. Laura arrived early, hesitant, the co-parenting seminar brochure clutched loosely in her hand. She wasn't sure what she expected. Maybe cold looks from strangers. Maybe Curtis wouldn't show up at all. But he did, quietly, 5 minutes before the session began, wearing a charcoal hoodie and simple jeans. They sat side by side in plastic chairs, listening to a counselor speak about raising children after separation. The tension between them wasn't hostile, it was just unfamiliar. When the speaker asked the group to write down one word that defined their journey so far, Laura wrote guarded. Curtis, without glancing at hers, wrote aware. After the session, they lingered near the doorway while parents filtered out. Laura glanced at Curtis. "Did this feel strange to you?" she asked. He nodded. "Strange, but necessary." Just then a small voice shouted, "Mommy." Miles, one of the triplets, came running in with Julian close behind. They'd been in the attached children's playroom. Laura bent down, scooping him up. "You two had fun," she smiled. "Yes." Miles exclaimed, then turned to Curtis. You came too? There was no judgment in the boy's tone, just innocence. Curtis crouched, meeting their height. I did. Just wanted to see how smart you all are. The moment was small but seismic. Julian reached out, placing his hand on both Laura's and Curtis's. Without thinking, their hands met for a second, fingertips brushing, worlds colliding. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was something. Laura looked up, just briefly, and Curtis met her eyes. In that blink of connection, a single unspoken truth passed between them. The road ahead would be long, but it might finally be leading home. It was nearly midnight when Carol walked past the quiet cul-de-sac where Laura now lived. The house wasn't extravagant, but it had a glow, porch lights lit, curtains gently drawn, warmth radiating from within. Carol wore no makeup this time. Her heels clicked softly on the pavement as she approached the parked SUV in the driveway. She stopped when she saw silhouettes through the front window. Laura reading on the couch, the triplets curled up nearby, and Curtis stepping into view holding mugs of what looked like hot chocolate. It was too ordinary to be staged, too real to be ignored. Her chest tightened. She had thought she could undo Laura's peace with a single trick, a single lie, but the image before her showed what she never truly had, family. Love that didn't need performance. She inched closer to the car window and stared at her own reflection before whispering bitterly. They think this is over, but I don't lose. Her voice trembled, not with strength, but with desperation. Just then, Curtis glanced toward the window as if sensing something. Carol stepped back into the shadows, her breath caught. He didn't move. He only stared out, quiet, contemplative. Maybe he saw nothing, or maybe he saw everything. Carol turned away, fists clenched. You'll never heal in peace, she muttered into the night air. Not if I can help it. She walked away with the same fire she used to manipulate others, but something about her steps felt unsteady, unsure. The night swallowed her whole, and this time there were no schemes left. Just bitterness and silence that no one rushed to fill. Laura stood in the softly lit room with a circle of strangers, each person holding a candle in their lap. It was her third trauma recovery session, and still she hadn't spoken much. But tonight felt different. The counselor, a gentle woman named Amina, encouraged them to write down the one moment they never allowed themselves to grieve. Laura's hand trembled as she scribbled, losing myself while waiting to be chosen. When her turn came, she didn't read it aloud. Instead, she looked around at the others and said, I forgot how to exist outside of someone else's shadow. The group was silent. Then a nod, then another. Then a tear fell, not from Laura, but from a woman across from her. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. The kind that says, me too. That night, Laura journaled for the first time in nearly 5 years. Her handwriting had changed, softer, slower. She wrote not about Curtis or Carol or even the boys. She wrote about herself. Dear me, she began, I am proud of you for surviving what no one clapped for. The words poured out like they'd been waiting in the walls of her chest. When she finally closed the book, she sat in stillness. Outside her window, the moon hung low, bathing her bedroom in quiet silver light. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel anxious about tomorrow. She didn't feel the weight of what-ifs pressing on her ribcage. She simply laid back, eyes wide open, and let the silence wrap around her like a warm quilt. Curtis wasn't her healing. The triplets weren't her recovery. She was doing the work for herself by herself, and it was enough. It was one of those rare evenings when the house hummed with gentle activity. Toys were scattered, dinner plates stacked in the sink, and Miles was reading to his brothers in their room, barely pronouncing every third word correctly, but proud nonetheless. Laura stood at the doorway, watching them in their element. Julian, the quietest of the three, suddenly asked, Mommy, who was that man who waved at us at the park last time? The question landed softly, but it echoed deeply. Laura didn't answer immediately. She walked over, sat at the foot of the bed, and smoothed Julian's curls. That man, she said slowly, is someone who's learning how to be better. Caleb frowned. Is he coming to live here? Laura smiled gently. No, sweetheart, but he may visit, only if you want him to. Julian looked thoughtful. He looked like us. Laura nodded. He helped make you. But being a family isn't just about making someone. It's about showing up over and over again. The boys nodded, content with her words. Miles added, he was smiling, not like a stranger smile. More like he knew us from a dream. Laura blinked back unexpected tears. Children had a way of seeing truth uncluttered. Maybe he did, she whispered. Maybe he's been dreaming of that smile for years. She kissed each of their foreheads and tucked them in. As she turned off the light, Julian's voice rang out one more time, soft but firm. If he wants to learn, I think we can teach him. Laura closed the door, hand on her chest. Her sons didn't just carry Curtis's face, they carried her heart. And now they carried the courage she never knew she'd pass on. Curtis arrived at Laura's doorstep with a letter in hand and no rehearsed speech. He wore a simple navy jacket, jeans, and a hesitant look that didn't beg for acceptance. It asked for permission to try. Laura opened the door halfway, her expression unreadable. I'm not here to plead, he began, gently offering her the envelope. This isn't a request, it's a truth. You can read it now, later, or never. She hesitated, then accepted it, her fingers brushing his just slightly. You've said a lot already, she murmured. Curtis lowered his gaze. And done too little. That's why I stopped talking and started listening, to myself, to the silence, to what I ruined. He took a small step back. No pressure. No promises, just presence. Laura studied him. This wasn't the man she once begged to notice her. This was someone else. Whether better or not, she couldn't yet say. Later that night, after the triplets had gone to bed and the house had quieted to its familiar hum, Laura sat alone in her reading nook. The envelope was still unopened beside a half-finished cup of hibiscus tea. Finally, she tore it open. Inside was a letter not flowery, not grand, just raw. Curtis had written about the night he signed the vasectomy consent, about the way her absence echoed in his apartment, about seeing their boys laugh from afar and feeling like a thief in their story. I didn't know how much I broke until I saw what you built without me, he wrote, and I will never ask to fix what I broke. I only ask to be worthy enough to be invited near it. Laura's hands trembled. She wiped her eyes, unsure if it was from pain or peace. She folded the letter and slid it beneath her pillow. The door to her heart hadn't opened, but it was no longer bolted shut. Laura stood at the window as dawn softened the sky into gentle pinks and golds. The city hadn't fully woken yet. Behind her, the soft breathing of her children filled the space with warmth. She clutched the curtain with one hand, the other resting on her chest. Outside, a plane rose quietly into the sky, its trail vanishing slowly like fading memories. It reminded her of how far she had come, not just geographically, but emotionally. Healing was no longer something she feared. It was something she faced, one piece at a time. She had chosen peace, not because she forgot the pain, but because the pain had finally taught her what boundaries looked like. When she heard a soft knock on her bedroom door, she didn't tense. It was Julian, carrying the letter Curtis had written. "Mommy," he said, "can I draw something for him?" She nodded, kneeling to his level. "What would you like to draw?" Julian grinned. "A bridge, so he can walk over to us if he keeps being nice." Laura laughed, kissed his forehead, and held him tightly. Later that morning, she texted Curtis just one line. "You may come for dinner. Bring only honesty. No emojis, no warmth. Just a beginning." Curtis, miles away, sat in his office and stared at the message. He didn't smile. He didn't jump. He closed his laptop and whispered, "Thank you." Meanwhile, Carol sat alone in a hair salon downtown, flipping through old photos of her and Curtis that now felt foreign. Her reflection didn't comfort her anymore. In the Bennett home, laughter rang from the kitchen where pancakes were burning and syrup dripped onto the floor. Life wasn't perfect, it wasn't clean, but it was real. As Laura leaned over to wipe Julian's cheek, she whispered, "This isn't the end. It's the first real page." And so, the woman he left on the runway became the woman standing at the gate, not waiting for love to arrive, but choosing who she'd let enter next. Here's the Bible verse for chapters Proverbs 24, verse 16. Why this verse? This passage reflects Curtis's journey of rising from moral failure, embracing the pain of his past, and choosing growth instead of comfort. It also parallels Carol's eventual downfall, not from accident, but from deliberate deception. Laura's rise, despite heartbreak, shows that healing is possible for those who choose wisdom over bitterness. Moral of the story explanation. Curtis's change wasn't accepted at face value. It had to be earned. Laura's healing didn't require revenge, just boundaries and growth. Carol's lies, while momentarily believable, could not survive the test of time and truth. This moral reminds readers that real healing requires time, accountability, and integrity, and that even those once hurt can rise with grace without needing to destroy others to rebuild themselves. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.